Hi gang. So it's August 2021 and I've been doing this for about 6 months now. And I've just passed 25,000 subscribers, which, I mean, I didn't expect that in 6 months. I was mostly just bored in lockdown with nothing to edit or film. And I thought, all right, I'll give this YouTube thing a go. So yeah, thanks. I think it's been going pretty well. A couple of videos have done really, really well, and I've learned a lot, including a couple of new skills. My original intent was to post once a week for, say, a year and then see how it was going. In hindsight, that might have been a little optimistic. Now that the world's starting up again and work is starting up again, it's become more and more difficult to do one a week, and I've missed a couple. But series like The Book Club with Mira or Tale of Four Gamers with Gary and Bobby and Russ have really helped lift the weight off my shoulders when it's all getting a bit too busy. Anyway, in celebration of this, and as a sort of 6-month marking point, I asked on the YouTube community feature if I should do something like an AMA, and generally people said yes and then started sending me all their questions. So in this video, I'm going to try and answer as many as I can, give a bit of a preview into what I'm going to do next, and then maybe run a few questions past you. Okay, here goes. As a relatively new player, having only experienced the mid to end of 8th edition and 9th so far, what's your opinion on the direction of Warhammer 40k? Do you prefer the older editions and Games Workshop? What do you think of the way the hobby is now compared to back in the day? Okay, big one to start then. It's really, really hard to compare what the hobby was like when I was a teenager in the 90s and what the hobby's like now. Partly because one thing that's happened while this hobby's grown is that the internet's kind of grown around it, which changes a lot of the way people interact. When I played back in the 90s, it was just me and a small group of friends, like figuring out everything for ourselves in almost a sealed environment. We could occasionally call through to the local Games Workshop store or the Trolls if we had any big rules questions, but mostly you just sort of figured it out for yourself. So I generally remember it as a sort of weekend pastime that I presume lots of other small groups of people around the country were doing, rather than something you'd even consider being like good at or testing how good you are at. I mean, who would you test against? Now, with such a huge resource of like articles and tactics and talk online, it's much easier to feel like you're part of one big community. I mean, that's what the internet does, right? Which is really, really good in many ways, but this has sort of gone alongside a ramping up of the competitiveness of the whole game, because it's way easier to talk about list building online. And generally, while I think a bit of that's fine, I think the rise to prominence of competitive gaming as the main way of playing 40k is a bad thing. Two here that are similar. How would you describe the tonal shift between Rogue Trader 40k and current 40k? And do you think there's been a significant tonal shift in 40k? And any thoughts on the death of Warhammer Fantasy Battle? Yeah, I think there's been a few tonal shifts in 40k, from being a very sort of deliberately silly satirical world in the mid-90s through to becoming a bit more family friendly, through to the sort of edgy direction they tried to go in the late 90s, until now where it feels like maybe they're trying to hit a lot of different markets with different products. The question mentions fleshing out the background, and I don't have a huge problem with that, apart from the fact that it drains away a lot of the satire. I guess the more background you flesh out, the more realistic you have to make it, and if you try and make 40k realistic, it gets really dark really quickly. Regarding Warhammer Fantasy Battle, yeah, I can't really blame them for ending it. By the end of Warhammer Fantasy Battle in the late 2000s, it was getting really unwieldy, certainly way too unwieldy for a new player to get into it, with tons and tons of models required. And I think no one was buying it, and they saw the opportunity to do something that people might actually be interested in getting into. I'm interested to see where this old world stuff goes. I'd be interested in playing it, though I do think they need to make it a bit more accessible than 8th edition fantasy was at the end. But I'm a bit put off by a lot of the old world community chat. In a lot of the forums, it feels like just a bunch of old grognards complaining about how their game used to be better. So I like the idea of playing the game, but it doesn't fill me with optimism at the minute. Aside from the Bad Ab War, what's your favourite Intra-Imperium conflict? And will the Kaifast Kane books be making an appearance in the book reviews? I've always thought they could do something really interesting with the Age of Apostasy. I think there's loads of potential there for an interesting story. There's some really interesting Space Marine legions that schism around that time. I think there's some interesting factions they could put in. Frateris Templar or Daughters of the Emperor would be fun. But also, one of the things 40k is a satire of is organised religion. And this feels like the perfect place to examine that. With Kane, I don't know. I've suggested it to Mira, maybe as a palate cleanser between Inquisition trilogies, so we'll see. Okay, a few similar ones here. Squats, bring them back as Imperial Guard Auxiliary. Which minor faction should make it to the tabletop? Do you think Squats will ever return as a playable faction? Are there any armies that don't have official rules that you'd like to play as? What is your position on homemade fandexes? I'd love to see Squats come back. I think they could do something interesting with them again. I'm not sure they will. I think they're more likely to keep them as a little bit of flavour in games like Necromunda. There's a lot of minor Imperial factions that are really characterful that I'd really like to see on the tabletop. Stuff like Frateris Militia or Adeptus Arbites. I think those are much more likely to make it to the tabletop, but none of those are full armies. I'd really like to see them in like an Inquisition Codex or an Imperial Agents book or something. Maybe just a couple of units and a couple of command models each. And that's part of the problem I usually have with fan dexes. A lot of the time fan dexes take an army that's meant to be limited in some way and then just give it everything. So you end up with the Adeptus Arbites going from a paramilitary police force used to control populations on human worlds to like having Arbites dreadnoughts and las cannons or something, which doesn't feel right. I think it's rare that there's a fan dex that knows what restraint is, so I tend to ignore them. Another few here. Have you ever played a game using the Rogue Trader rules? First edition, not the role-playing game. After Necromunda, what game history deep dives will you do next? Your video about making a Necromunda gang in all older editions was really cool. Would you do something similar to 40k? Right, I'm doing all these together as they're a little linked. I have played Rogue Trader, but not since I was 10 years old. It was what was happening when I was just getting into 40k, and it became second edition just as I really started buying models. So I've played it, but I can't really remember it. The rest actually reminds me of an idea Bobby had, which was the idea of doing Battle for the Farm, which was the scenario from the old Rogue Trader book, but doing that same scenario in every version of the game so you can see how that game changed over time. So I like that idea. Maybe we'll get around to that at some point. Have you ever played Epic at any point, any of the 3 or 4 editions? And will you continue with more of the Warhammer Fantasy 5th edition multiplayer campaign stuff? Yeah, like the Rogue Trader question, I have played Epic, but ages and ages ago. It would have been 2nd edition Epic or Titan Legions sort of era, and I haven't played since. There are some people at the club who play. I would like to play again, but I don't know when I'm going to get around to it. Regarding Tale of 4 Gamers, yep, I think we've got maybe 2 updates in us before our armies are finished, and that would time in with when we're planning to do a mini event. So yeah, that'll continue until then, and we've already started talking about what Tale of 4 Gamers we might do after that. What's one thing you like and one thing you dislike about the Eisenhorn novels? The big thing I always really like about novels like Eisenhorn is a look at the functioning of the Imperium behind the scenes off the battlefield, because it makes it a vastly more believable world to play in. So that's usually what draws me to them. The thing I'd say I dislike, it's obvious that at the time these were written, maybe Black Library was imposing a word count, and sometimes those novels get so caught up in their locations and their plot that they sort of forget that the end is looming and then have to wrap things up really, really quickly. That happened in Malleus. It sort of happens in Hereticus too. Have you ever tried Grim Dark Future, a set of rules inspired by 40k but designed to be simpler and quicker to play and also free? Yeah, loads of people have recommended this, especially when I was doing my open play videos. I've been aware of it for ages, since before it was called Grim Dark Future, since it was just one-page rules. I've never actually got round to playing. I would like to. Gary and I would love to do a little series on like simpler ways of playing 40k, so that might come up. My worry looking at the rules is that it won't feel anything like playing 40k, which, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. We'll find out. About starting a YouTube channel, how much money and effort did you put in to get equipment and learn new skills to be able to produce your YouTube channel? Did you have video editing skills before YouTube, or did you learn them for the channel? Right, so I do have a bit of an advantage here. I design visuals for live events for a living. I have a little company that do that. So while I'm not a film industry editor, I have been using Adobe Suite for about 20 years now, and that's what I use to make all these. That doesn't mean I didn't need to learn new skills. Presenting to camera is something I'd never done before, though I have given lectures about my job, which is weirdly similar. There's a very specific way of presenting to YouTube, which I had to learn, and I've never really done a lot of audio mixing or color grading before. Those things took a little while to get used to. Both of them are things that I think have improved over the last 6 months, which I quite like, but it does mean that I have most of the software and equipment necessary ready to go already. The only things I bought were a Rode NTG2 mic, because the original videos I started off was just a little crappy SM58 on a stand on my desk, and a 4K capture card so I could speed up the time going from camera to computer. What equipment and software did you use? I've answered that one already. What are your thoughts on the narrative expansions to 40k, e.g. Gathering Storm and Psychic Awakening? Yeah, I was kind of happy with the setting being permanently 5 minutes to midnight. I didn't have a problem with that. The nice thing about that is that you could sort of dip into bits of the setting and just enjoy that little storyline or that little part without worrying too much about keeping up. On the other hand, I'm quite enjoying the advancing timeline, so I don't have a problem with those supplements. The only thing I would have done is I would have liked if those supplements, especially Psychic Awakening, became a set of rules you used in that specific campaign rather than just general updates for all the codexes. All that really did was mean that you had to own all the books in order to know all the rules, which was really annoying. The biggest question the fans need to know, Gork or Mork? Gork or Mork? Okay, Mork. Any plans to cover fantasy lore or model design retrospectives in the vein of the Bad App and Necromunda videos? Yeah, I'm not as well read with fantasy, but it is something I'd like to do. I think a summary of the end times would be quite a good thing, and I'd also really like to tackle Tamokan. Favourite characters in the lore, favourite legion, who's your favourite Primarch, and why is it sanguineous? What has been your favourite model to build, to paint, or to play? And when did you get into 40k? And favourite to least favourite faction? Favourites. I'm really bad at picking favourites in anything. Like, I couldn't tell you what my favourite band is or my favourite film or even my favourite colour. Regarding legions, I have a soft spot for the Emperor's Children. They were my first Chaos Space Marine army. And the White Scars, I think my favourite Primarch is probably Jagatai Khan. At least the way he's written in the Heresy, he's almost the only believably wise adult in the whole lot of them. I got into 40k because I had a next door neighbour, maybe when I was 8 or 9, who was into Warhammer. They were maybe, I don't know, 13 or 14. So we used to play with Rogue Trader models. I mean, I was probably too young to really be playing it, but you get the idea. And then when I started secondary school, it was just around the same time that 2nd edition came out, and that's when I really started playing. I also got Hero Quest and Space Crusade as Christmas presents over a few years, and they were obviously big pulls into the whole thing. How has your opinion on various factions or races changed? Was there ever one you fell out of love with, couldn't stand, but got turned around on? Yeah, actually, Tau were a big one like that. When they were first released, it just wasn't my thing. I was never someone who grew up with like mecha anime, so I wasn't really the target market. But then later on, I really liked the fact that they were a self-contained unit, so I collected a little army of them. And then the whole game took a turn towards mega robot models, and I just lost interest again. I saw a lot of 40k questions, so I wanted to ask, what do you enjoy outside the hobby? Yeah, interesting. It's been really affected by lockdown, the answer to that question. I'm not sure watching Drag Race or obsessively watching YouTube videos about Drag Race counts as a hobby, but one of the other things I've been doing a lot in my time is roller skating. I took up roller skating to try and keep fit at the start of lockdown, and I'm still at the stage where if I went to a skate park, I'd be flat on my face within seconds. That isn't stopping me, but still. But I did recently get to do Paris Roller when I was out working in Paris, which is this huge event that happens every week where they close down a load of roads and you do an 11-kilometer skate around the city centre. It was exhausting, but it was really fun. And it's the biggest thing like that I've done so far. Hello, you seem like a really nice person. Thanks. And it seems like we share a lot of values. I appreciate how you don't shy away from calling out the more problematic bits of the lore and keep reaffirming the satirical aspect of the setting while still obviously caring a lot about it. Related, how are you finding managing parasocial relationships with your audience? And on the hobby side of things, any tips for relative newcomers? Yeah, thanks for that. I think one of the nice things about 40k being as old as it is that we can look at it as something that exists within a social context. Like, we can look at this whole thing and go, oh, well, that was written in the 80s and you can see it was written in the 80s, and we're okay saying we probably wouldn't do that nowadays, and it might have had unfortunate implications for later fluff. I think it's old enough that you can do that without anyone thinking, well, that means you hate 40k. I think that's like a silly idea. If you like something, you should be able to criticize it. And also, I think the player base is now really wide. You got people from 10 years old to 60 doing this hobby. So, you know, there should be areas in which we can have an adult conversation about it, right? Regarding audience and parasocial relationships, so far, I consider myself very lucky to have what seems to be a group of subscribers and commenters who mostly share my views. You hear a lot of horror stories going into making a YouTube channel, and especially so when you're willing to discuss the political side of hobby things. But actually, it's felt fine so far. I've got world filters on, and so far it does a good job of filtering the crazies. Sometimes I've got dodgy comments that get held for review. I tend to tweet those so everyone can laugh at them and then delete them. One of the interesting things I did discover a few months in is that as a creator, you get notified about top level comments, but you don't get notified about replies to comments unless they breach the word filter. So it took a few months for me to realize that there were reply comment threads going on. And when I saw them, I was heartened to see that when the occasional racist or Nazi turned up in them, there were already regular commenters and subscribers shutting them up for me. So that was a really heartening thing. So yeah, thanks for being a nice bunch of people. I'll let you know if it gets too creepy. Dead to the World has a few questions. Some of them I've answered already, so I'll do the ones I haven't answered. Have you been interested in non-40k lines by Games Workshop, and what are your thoughts on them? Have you considered Warcry or Underpants, and do you have thoughts on those? Yeah, I play Age of Sigmar. I quite like Age of Sigmar, though I haven't tried 3rd edition yet. I have played Underpants. I've not played Warcry, but I would like to. Underpants was really interesting. Me and Gary used to play it down the pub when it was first released because it felt like a very manageable little game to fit on a table. But as it got more and more into being a deck building game, I just lost interest. I don't want things I have to keep up with. From a system production value standpoint, what's your favourite non-Games Workshop company and why? Yeah, that's a really difficult one because so many of the competitors to 40k bill themselves as either being even bigger games like Mantic, which I like, but I don't want to know, or by being much tighter and more realistic, which is something like, I don't know, Infinity, which again, not really into. I was really interested in Anvil Industries' game Afterlife. There was a beta version or a version 1 that we played a bit, and it was really, really fun and really good and sort of mid-sized skirmish game. And obviously Anvil's models are lovely. They're also local to me. I'd really like them to start that up again. I think the rules are available for download from their website, so yeah, it's worth checking out. Can you give any advice regarding current Necromunda gangs and tactics? Yeah, no, sorry. I'm a bit out of the loop with modern Necromunda since the House book started being released, and I think they change up everything. So I'm not really at the point where I can give any tactical advice on that. What are your favourite 40k books? And specifically in terms of getting people in, what 5 do you recommend to new readers? I'm definitely going to do a video about this. I would usually just say Eisenhorn. I think it is still a good way in. I also think Gaunt's Ghosts is a really good intro, especially if you start with Necropolis, skip the first 2. But picking a modern book in the current timeline is actually quite difficult. I think a lot of them require you to know a lot about 40k. Maybe Spears of the Emperor seems like the most standalone one so far. What niche would you like your channel to sit in as part of the wider Games Workshop YouTube selection, and what do you want to be best known for or your unique selling point? Yeah, that's an interesting question because it's evolved over the last few months. I guess the original thing I noticed, especially within 40k background videos and lore videos or whatever, was a load of people making very long videos talking about the setting like they're in the setting and it all makes sense, and no one really talking about the game in a wider cultural context or the game as a setting that someone had to invent. I take the piss out of those hour-long reading Lexicanum videos, but I get why people like them, right? They're something to have on while you're painting, so I get it. It just didn't seem like a really good way of getting people into it. So that was the original intention. And over the last few months, that initial background focus kind of morphed into talking about gaming culture or why things are the way they are. I guess if you wanted to think of a unique selling point, it would be the idea that someone who has been in the game for a very long time is explaining to you why it has ended up the way it is, I suppose. But who knows where it'll end up. I really should get back to doing some background videos at some point. Okay, here goes. With the way Games Workshop's treating the fandom, why would anyone want to start in the hobby? Right, I could go on for 20 minutes about this, but I won't. So given it's August 21, I assume this is talking about either pre-orders or something, or the recent changes to their rules about fan animations. So first, I've been in the hobby long enough to remember when Games Workshop shut down all their forums and stopped taking any feedback to avoid any criticism. So this isn't even slightly as far as Games Workshop have gone before. I think generally their actions aren't that bad and they have a much better customer relationship than a lot of companies do. And I think the idea that the fan base are really angry with Games Workshop is just over the top. In reality, it is a vocal, angry, entitled minority. The majority of people who play these games just don't care. Regarding selling out a limited edition stuff, yeah, they could print more copies, but limited editions are designed to sell out. They're promotional items. Advertising them doesn't guarantee you the chance to get one. I've never really been someone who queues up for limited edition stuff, so I'm not bothered by it. Regarding fan animations, it's August 21, so what happened so far is that I think Games Workshop sent a cease and desist to one animator who was using their IP, and then the big furore started when text-to-speech device pulled their channel out of fear of the same happening to them. Personally, I get that people really liked it, but I wasn't a big fan of text-to-speech device. I thought it was a bit silly, and not silly in the 40k good way. When you boil it all down, we're talking about Games Workshop protecting their IP, which they're kind of legally required to do. Text-to-speech device is a particularly big example because they were taking literal licensed commissioned Games Workshop art they own, cutting it out and then using it to make a parody of 40k for profit with no real argument towards it being satire or a review or anything like that. To be honest, I don't see it as being that different to the recasting argument. I would say it was only a matter of time, but of course, Games Workshop didn't actually stop them. They did it themselves, so meh. I think also we're living in an environment where Games Workshop recently have had to shut down some YouTube channels for, using their background to sell very dodgy political ideology. So I would get that they're quite hypersensitive about this sort of thing. In short, I think Games Workshop are doing fine. I don't think this is some massive betrayal of the fan base. I think it's all overblown nonsense, and they're doing about as well as a big company with many, many heads in capitalism could do. And almost a disclaimer now, did you ever work for Games Workshop? No specifics needed. No, never have. Did Horus fall or turn to chaos too easily or readily? In the novels, yeah, totally. I mean, I get it. At the start of the Horus Heresy series, they weren't really intending that to be 50 novels long, so they had to get a move on. But given it became 50 novels long, I would have really liked to see Horus's path as he becomes maybe slightly disillusioned with the Emperor and the Imperium, and that's then the way the chaos can get in slowly. I think that would have been a much better story. They did do that with other characters and Primarchs over time, but obviously it would have been nice to do that with Horus to start with. Do you foresee a time when Marine Firstborns are given the old Thunder Warrior treatment? Nah, not really. What I could see is a world where they just become less and less common until there's one entry in the Space Marine Codex that says Veteran Firstborn Squad and it's the Tactical Squad. But I can't see there's any real reason to do a cull, not narratively in the background. Who are your top 3 Warhammer 40k YouTubers? Yeah, that's a difficult one. There's a load of 40k YouTube I don't watch. Generally, I'm not a fan of the idea that a hobby is something you have to be good at, whether that's painting or playing. And that rules out a lot of 40k YouTube. It rules out a lot of the battle reports because so many of them are match play competitive focused. It rules out a lot of painting videos because a lot of them have this undertone that you need to level up, which I massively disagree with. If I had to pick a top 3, I'd go with Snipe and Wib. I really like their videos. I think they've got a really good attitude about the hobby, and I find it all really interesting. They were like quite a big influence when I was starting this channel. On more of the hobby side, maybe Midwinter Minis, I really like Guy's tone and delivery as just another person into 40k rather than someone trying to like present a channel. I think it's nice to watch, and he has some simple, effective techniques. And finally, as a painting channel, maybe Marco Frizzoni. Again, really good advice, really well presented, and he does the same thing with his painting that I enjoy in my painting, which is speed and efficiency. I should also take this opportunity to say that a few friends from my gaming circle have also started YouTube channels this year. Monk's channel, Googly Eyed Skull, has some really fun modelling and converting videos, which are just really entertaining to watch and really nicely shot. John over at Can I Roll a Crit has been doing videos about his favourite game, Warhammer Underpants, and In Lockdown, Underpants Online. And Ben, who originally came up with the idea for the Tale of Four Gamers campaign, has just started doing some unboxing videos over at Amaze Gaming. I'll put all the links to all of those in the thing below. How can we challenge you to a game? Difficult at the moment, life is busy. If you're ever in or near London, I play at the Hate Club, which despite the name is the friendliest and most inclusive bunch of gamers I've ever met. Come down and say hello. Might need to go easy on me though, because I haven't been playing a lot recently. Another set of questions. Given that God is infinite and the universe is also infinite, would you like a toasted tea cake? Good reference. Also, bonus points for toasted tea cakes because they're vegan, so I can eat them. Since you seem to be a literature guy, have you read or what your thoughts about any favourite fan fiction set in the 40k universe? Yeah, I must say I don't read a lot of fan fiction other than what I listen to at the end of 40k Bagcast. The only thing that comes to mind is the old Dornian Heresy, which is one of the few things I read like that where I actually went, this is just brilliantly conceived. I think you can still find it online. I'm curious about your thoughts about lore expanding at the expense of mystery. Similar to a previous question, but I don't really mind it. I tend to find that as mysteries are solved, more mysteries get written in, so it's fine. Do you or any of your group play pen and paper role-playing games? Yes, sort of. I started playing D&D again in lockdown with my partner and some friends. None of them had ever played before, so I had to be the DM, but it was all on Roll20, so I've never actually played pen and paper, at least not for 10, 15 years now. Russ and maybe Bobby both play role-playing games, and Mira is like a Dungeons & Dragons celebrity, or at least she should be at the minute. She appears on podcasts and does live games and stuff. Have you ever read any Pratchett? Yeah, absolutely. Pratchett got me through my teenage years. I actually think there's a huge crossover between the way Pratchett sees the world and the way early 40k saw the world. There's some really similar bits in it that must be something to do with the era. But yeah, I really like it. Have you ever read any Ian M. Banks? Weirdly, no. 2 questions. If you were to write the next big narrative shift in 40k, what would it be? And favourite quote from the Horus Heresy series. Yeah, I've no idea about the narrative shift. I've always liked the idea of there being a group of humans that aren't part of the Imperium and the Imperium being way too busy to deal with that. A bit like the Tau. I really liked it in the Heresy novels when that sort of thing with Great Crusade factions came up. I like that. But I really don't need any Primarchs coming back or anything. Regarding quote, the best quote from the Horus Heresy series is the first one. I was there the day Horus slew the Emperor. It's a brilliant way to start a series when you know everyone reading it's already a 40k fan. Non-hobby, but what music do you like? I'm actually really bad at listening to music nowadays. I spent all of my 20s playing in bands or DJing or promoting club nights, and I think I just reached saturation point. Now I listen to podcasts all the time, even at the gym. Are you the same Arbitarian on Daka Daka whose profile picture is a dude with 2 Vortex templates as eyes? Yeah, Gary and I used to make photo battle reports there. ADB versus Dan Abner in a writing cage match. Who wins? Yeah, that's a difficult one. If it's just about writing, I'd say it depends how you judge it, doesn't it? If you are doing it mostly on character and character studies, I think ADB gets it. Aaron wins that one. But if you were doing it on scale and multiplicity of storylines, I think Dan would win. Did you play or collect any models for the Inquisitor speciality game? If so, can we see them? No, I didn't. I'm always someone who converts models. I convert everything I do. And when that was released, the idea that there weren't many other models you could convert from just wasn't a big draw for me. I did try and play the game with 28mm models, but I can't really remember how it went. That would have been a long time ago. Do you agree that Magnus did nothing wrong? Yeah, whatever you think about the way he tried to warn the Emperor, I would argue that encouraging all your legion to have little demon buddies and dealing with chaos to save them in the first place were probably mistakes. Second edition Eldar D cannon, the funniest weapon in 40k, or is there better? Nah, shock attack gun, the metal one with the 3 whirly balls. That was the funniest weapon in 40k. Right, thanks. That's almost all of them. Sorry if I missed any. So, plans coming up. As I said before, keeping up with once a week is difficult, but I'm still going to do it. Partly because there's so many little series running now that I kind of have to do one a week just to keep up with everything. I do intend to make some more background videos. I would like to do one on the Slan. I'd also like to do some hobby tips and hobby videos, but it requires a slightly different setup and I haven't quite got my head around it yet. Gary's also been buying some old games, so we're probably going to do some Let's Plays soon. As I said, there will also be some sort of Tale of 4 Gamers once this one wraps up, but we haven't decided what it is yet. It might decide on what Games Workshop release or re-release in the next few months. We'll see. One thing I want to ask the community is actually about Patreon and monetization. It was really interesting when I monetized the channel. I mean, I'm not giving up the day job anytime soon, but that little bit of extra was quite a nice way of keeping yourself incentivized when you're busy and don't think you're going to make a video this week. I was toying with the idea of a Patreon. I'm not sure if it's a bit too early. I think if I did it, I would just do one tier that's very low and it's just like the perk is when I don't know what to do next, I'll ask. I don't want to become one of those people who's always like and subscribe and follow my Patreon in every video. I've also started getting messages from VPNs asking me the cost of advertising and I don't want to make those. So yeah, really simple Patreon. Is it worth doing? Not worth doing? Hold off. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments. And yeah, otherwise, thanks everyone. Thanks for clicking on my stuff. Thanks for helping grow the channel and spreading the word. It's been a really fun 6 months. My only regret is really that I didn't do this a year earlier at the start of lockdown. Oh well. See you next time.